On this week's episode of Lincoln to Local, our Oklahoma Farm Bureau members have recently returned from a trip to Washington, D.C., and Gage Milliman will share with us the issues that were on the top of their minds as they visited with Oklahoma's congressional delegation. But first, we'll recap all the action at the state legislature and where Oklahoma Farm Bureau's priority bills are at in the legislative process. Gage, we've had a couple busy weeks here at Oklahoma Farm Bureau. We were in D.C. last week, and of course, last week and this week, the Oklahoma legislature has just been rolling right along. And I know since last time we talked at Lincoln to Local, we've had some priority bills move through the process. If you can share with us what those bills are and kind of what those steps are they've taken through the legislative process so far.
Of course. We had a couple bills that got through Senate Judiciary Committee this week. So those are House bills that are over on the Senate side as they are now. One of those was House Bill 2752 by Representative Caldwell. And it's one of those priority bills we've talked about a lot, dealing with those renewable energy and eminent domain issues, just saying that those private entities can't use eminent domain to take those leases to put up those facilities. The other bill has been a real important bill to us, House Bill 1166 by Representative Mike Kelly, and it's dealing with annexation. And as we've spoken before, it just clarifies in the law that if a city or municipality wants to annex any land, that they have to have the representation of 51% of the acres. The landowners that represent that majority would have to agree to be annexed. And we've caught some opposition along as we've gone through with that bill a little bit, but it's been going well, and it did get through that committee this week, and both of those bills will be eligibly heard on the Senate floor at any time.
And just to kind of reiterate, people hear these bills and they think Farm Bureau might be taking one stance or another, but this is a private property rights issue for our Farm Bureau members, right? If you can kind of tell what the private property rights side of these bills really is.
That's definitely what they are. Like when it comes to the bills dealing with the renewable energy, and we have a couple other bills that work along those lines that still have not been heard in Senate committee, but they could yet before next week, and we'll be working on those as that time comes up. But they don't put any restrictions on the landowner's ability to sign leases with any of these companies to put up wind facilities, solar facilities, battery storage facilities. But we want to make sure that our members and those landowners have the right to make those decisions on what they want to take part in and what they don't. And when they tell these companies, no, I don't want to be part of that, we want them to have reassurance to know that they can't come back and take it from them without their permission.
I know another issue that we've been watching, at least at Oklahoma Farm Bureau, is cell-cultured proteins, and there's a couple bills. There's been a few bills rolling around the legislature, but I know we saw some movement again on a couple bills that you all have been watching in public policy.
We sure did. This week there were two bills, a House bill and a Senate bill, that are still alive and moving, and both of them went through committees this week. And House Bill 1126 by Representative Grego, it passed through the Senate Ag Committee this week. And then Senate Bill 96 by Senator Hamilton has already gone through a House committee, and this week went through a House Oversight Committee. So that House bill will be available to be heard on the Senate floor at any time, and the Senate bill can be heard on the House floor at any time. And both of those bills they're not the exact same bill, but they're similar, and they're just requiring some labeling on those cell-cultured proteins, whether they're derived from animals or insect protein. The label would have to designate where those things come from and where they're manufactured, so that way when they come to the grocery store, people know what they're purchasing. And it will be on the manufacturer to be required to put those labels on. It won't be on the grocery store. When it gets to those retail stores, it will already be labeled and ready to go.
What's Farm Bureau's position or take on those bills? Because I know you guys have been monitoring and watching them, and it's been on your radar, but what's Farm Bureau's stance here?
It's pretty well what our policy is, and it would support both of these bills, and it's asking for labeling of what these bills are. And then our policy also asks that we do not call it cell-cultured meat. We want it to be called protein. So we know that meat comes from a live animal, and these are other proteins come from other areas of manufacturing.
I know a big thing that we did here at Farm Bureau last week was to go to Washington, D.C. with more than 60 Farm Bureau members. What were some of those issues that our Farm Bureau members had a chance to visit about, both in congressional briefings with our actual elected representatives, as well as getting some industry briefings from folks from American Farm Bureau, U.S. agencies, and lots of other places, too?
It was a big week with a big group. I think everybody that went had a good time and hopefully learned something as well. There was one day we met with some industry leaders as well as AFBF staff members that filled us in on what's going on in D.C. on those national levels. And then the next day we got to travel to the Capitol and met with 4 of our congressmen and women and one of our senators and got updated on issues going on that they're dealing with every day. While we were there, we got the news that some of the tariffs that had been implemented were going to be postponed, and our delegation was excited about that and the discussion that they were having with other countries on what they can do moving forward to maybe not have to implement those tariffs. They also talked a lot of tax policy. There are some tax cuts that have taken place over the last few years that are set to expire. So they're working on some of those and looking what they'll look like. And our delegation says that will really affect our farmers and ranchers that were taking advantage of some of those policies. So that was a big discussion, as well as one of the hottest topics across the nation is immigration, and really affects us in agriculture because of that workforce and the labor that we need to have. And our once again, our delegation is working on good, sound policy to allow the immigration to supply that workforce that we need in a lawful way.
Now, I know it's hard to believe, but we're almost a month away to the end of legislative session as May is quickly approaching. Where are we at on the legislative calendar? How much time do you and public policy and our members around the state have to work on bills that are still in the process?
Well, we've definitely well past the halfway point at this time. And as I mentioned, several of those bills have been through committee and now can be heard on their respective floors. And we're to the point where when they're heard on the floor, if there hasn't been any amendments or anything like that done to them, they can go to the governor's desk. So we have one more week. Next week, Thursday, will be a deadline for all of these bills to get out of the committee, the oversight committees in the House and the Senate committees, obviously in the Senate. Then we have a couple more weeks after that to get them across the floor, and then they can follow up with any corrections or amendments and all those type of things. But we're just 3 or 4 weeks away from really wrapping up some of these bills we've been working on.
Well, we look forward to seeing how the legislative session turns out for our Farm Bureau members, and I know we'll be visiting in the near future about all the progress on these bills and even more, I'm sure. So thanks, Gage, for your time.
You're welcome.